I'm going to tell you straight up, I think this is going to be a long video, but it takes some bizarre twists and turns, so I think it'll be worth it for you to watch the whole thing. I mean, it's basically an autobiography and how I got interested in black bears and been fascinated by their behavior and the biology of black bears and bear hunting, and how I became known as the Bear Professor. Quite a few people on this channel have been asking for more personal information about me as this channel has grown, and more than just the bow hunting and everything that I do on this channel, but a lot of people are interested in how I got to this point. So I guess this video is going to be how I got this way. So let's start way back. Now, I had bear encounters, as a kid. I lived in bear country in north central Washington in the Cascade Mountains, and I saw bears from time to time. You maybe see a bear out in a hayfield, or you have a bear run across the road in front of you or whatever. But my first real up-close encounter with a bear was when I was in junior high, and this story, I'm not kidding you, it's a crazy one. But we had a group in our church called the Boys Brigade, and these were like 10 to 13-year-old boys, junior high age boys. And we had a couple of leaders that were men who loved to hunt and fish. And I'm telling you, this period of my life had a huge impact on me and who I became. And I was so grateful that we had these two guys who were leaders of this boys group in our church who took us fishing and stuff like that. And we were going up into the Cascade Mountains. We were going to hike into this alpine lake and fish for trout. And so we drove part way up into the mountains the day before, and we camped at this little pullout where you just could pull off the highway. And it was like, I think, an old logging landing. So I think there was maybe 3 pickup loads of us. There was maybe 10 boys and a couple of adults. And the adults stayed in a camper, and then one of the pickups had a topper on the back of it, and some of us rode all the way up in there on the back of this pickup in the topper. The adults camped in the camper, and then the boys, we just threw out a sleeping bag on the ground around the fire and told ghost stories or whatever, and then went to sleep. And sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up and I heard somebody going, "Bernie, Bernie." And I look around me, and all the sleeping bags are empty. And I look over, and all the boys are in the back of this pickup topper with the door open. They're going, "Bernie, Bernie, get in here. There's a bear." So, I just bailed out of my sleeping bag. I ran and jumped in the back of the topper, and one of the boys' eyes was like big around, and he goes, "The bear stepped right over your head." And sure enough, they had seen the bear on the outskirts of the campfire area. And one of the boys had said something, and everybody woke up, and they all run and jumped in the back of the truck. And then the bear walked in and sniffed me and walked right over the top of me and then just disappeared. And sure enough, a bear, thank God I didn't wake up while the bear was sniffing my sleeping bag and stepping right over my head. But that was my first up-close encounter with a bear, and I didn't even see it. Well, I loved living in the Cascade Mountains, but in 1973, we moved to Iowa. So I lost my fly fishing and the trout fishing. I continued to fly fish some, but I also learned to do other kind of fishing. And through high school, I took up bow hunting. My parents didn't hunt. I didn't really come from a background of hunting in my family. My parents let me buy a bow, but they wouldn't let me own a gun. And they're not really against guns. I think the thought of me with a gun probably is what freaked them out. But anyway, they let me buy a bow. So I started bow hunting white-tailed deer in north central Iowa, and also took up trapping and started catching muskrats and mink and raccoon and stuff like that. I was not very good at trapping at the beginning, couldn't hardly catch anything, but I didn't really have a mentor or a teacher, but more on that later. But I took up the whitetail bow hunting and really got involved in that, and just went through high school. All I could think about was hunting and fishing and trapping, and I just didn't pay attention in high school. I really didn't apply myself. I knew I was smart enough to get good grades, I actually, like my junior and senior year in high school, I never took homework home one time. I never studied for tests. I still got A's and B's and C's, but all I wanted to do was hunt and fish and trap, and I just wanted school to be over. I just wanted to get done with it. In fact, at our church we had this, what they called a baccalaureate, where, it was a way to honor the seniors, and they had the seniors all get up on stage and tell what they're going to do with their life. I remember one boy says, yeah, I'm going to Iowa State. I'm going to learn agronomy and farm with my dad. Another girl says, I'm going to Hamilton Business College and I'm going to become an accountant. And I got up there and said, I'm going fishing. And I meant it, man. College was not on my radar at all. So after graduation, I just packed almost everything I owned in my 1969 Cutlass, and I headed west, and I went to the mountains. I did some work for ranchers. I built fence, I baled hay, changed sprinkler pipes. I would come out of the mountains long enough to make enough money to buy food and gas, and I would just disappear back into the mountains for a couple weeks. And I just walked into a lot of high mountain lakes and fished. And this is where another one of my crazy bear encounters happened. So I was hiking back into this beaver meadow, and it's about 6 miles in there. It's a place, the creek is called Cedar Creek, and you got to hike way back in. It's 5 or 6 miles back in to where there's all these beaver ponds, and these beaver ponds are full of trout. I'd been in there before, and I knew it was really good fishing back in there. But it's a long haul back in there. So I was on this path along the creek, and I'm on edge already. I'm kind of jittery because you have to realize that in the early 1970s, they cut a new highway across the North Cascades. It's called the North Cascade Highway, and it was, I think, completed in 1972 or 73. And there was a huge number of Bigfoot encounters and tracks and sightings and stuff like that when they cut this highway through the Pasayten Wilderness. So I was a little jittery already going up into that area. I wasn't really even thinking about bears. Bears were kind of, maybe in the back of my mind, but, just being out in the wilderness by yourself when you're 18 years old, it can be a little unnerving anyway. As I'm walking along this trail, and I'm good 5 miles back in there, and all of a sudden I caught movement off to my right, and there's about 20 yards away, there is a downed log, and there's a bear with his feet up on the log and just kind of sniffing the air. And this is a light brown colored bear. And at that time, I didn't know enough about bears to really tell the difference between a grizzly bear and a black bear. But this was a light brown bear, could have been a black bear. I thought it was a grizzly bear when I first saw it, and it was a smaller bear. Now I know it was probably a yearling. And it was about 20 yards away, and I just stopped. And I got my fly rod in my hand, and this all took just a split second to happen, because the moment that I stopped and I saw the bear, then another bear stood up right in front of me. And it was kind of behind a bush, but when it stood up, it was the mother bear, I'm sure now. And it was close enough, I almost could have just reached out and poked it with a 9-foot fly rod. And it's just stood up and looked right at me. And I'm telling you that there's all these sayings about, like, if it's black, fight back, and don't panic, don't run. There's all these things that they say. But when something happens to you like that, well, you can just forget it. You don't have time to think about what to do. And I just completely lost it. Like, I turned around and I ran so hard and so fast, and I don't know what the bear did. It might have just ran the other way, or for all I know, just stood there and laughed at me. I just ran, and I ran hard, and I don't know how long I ran, but it was a long ways. And I was carrying this fly rod, and at some point, I had hit the fly rod on a tree, and it had broken into pieces. And so I'm just running with this 3-foot stub of fly rod in my hand. The pieces of the fly rod are hanging on by the line going through the eyelets, and they're just kind of bouncing along behind me while I'm just running with this broken fly rod. And I ran for quite a ways before I finally stopped to take a breath and look behind me. I had no idea. Pretty sure the bear hadn't chased me at that point, or it would have caught me. I was so scared, I just ended up walking the 5 miles back to my car and going and fishing somewhere else. So that was another of the wild bear encounters that I've had. There's more coming. So I spent that entire summer in the mountains in Washington, and then, you know, fall was coming and trapping season and bow hunting were about to start, and so I headed home. And I rented a farmhouse in the country for $60 a month, and I went to work at Winnebago Industries. I had to have a job, and I did some concrete construction and a little bit of other things, but mostly I just worked at Winnebago. I worked there for several years, and I hated my job. It wasn't that it was a bad job, it was just that it was a job. And I'm not wired to go to a job every day. And even though I got a couple promotions, I started to work my way up the ladder. I was there for, I think, 5 or 6 years. But I knew I wanted to be in the outdoors. I knew I had to figure out a way to make a living in the outdoors. And something really profound happened to me at that point. I pour myself into anything I'm passionate about. I pour myself into it. I work hard enough to get really good at it. And that's the way it was with trapping. And I was looking around me going, I'm catching more fur than anybody else I know. And fur prices are really good. This was in the early 80s. And I think I could make a living for at least part of the year just trapping. And I could work for farmers and do other things to generate income for the rest of the year. But I think I could make about a half a year's income just from trapping in the fall and winter, and maybe a little bit of beaver trapping in the spring. And I worked with a guy who had been at Winnebago for many, many years, and all he talked about was how he's going to retire. And he's going to buy a fifth wheel, and him and his wife are just going to travel, and he's so sick of going to the factory every day, and he just couldn't wait for retirement. Well, I was running traps at that time from like 2 o'clock in the morning up until I had to go to work at 7. This guy, he retired and he bought the fifth wheel, and then he died. And in the mornings, I had to drive right by his house into some of the areas where I was trapping raccoons. And that fifth wheel was sitting under his yard light at 4 o'clock in the morning when I was checking traps, and I just thought, I can't let that happen to me. And so I figured out a plan, and I quit my job at Winnebago. My family and friends thought I was nuts, but I trapped full time. But I started I think this was in 1984, and I started trapping full time. Delivered Winnebago motorhomes from the factory to dealers all over the U.S. and Canada during the summers. I did some farm work, so I did whatever it took to support my family. I had a wife and 2 going on 3 kids at that time. Well, the summer of '88, I learned of an opportunity to work on a commercial fishing boat in Alaska. So the skipper lived in Seattle during the winter, so I drove to Seattle, and I sat across the kitchen table from him, and I said, I really want to do this. I want to, I need a summer job. I need a summer income. Working on a commercial fishing boat in Alaska sounds like a blast. Well, it ain't a blast, I'll tell you that. So he's asking me all kinds of questions about if I can mend web. What kind of knots can I tie? Do I get seasick? And I'm like, I'm from Iowa. I don't know if I get seasick or not, But he saw something in me and he hired me. And so the summer of '88, I worked on a commercial fishing boat out of Sandpoint, Alaska, purse seining salmon. Got my wife and 3 kids up there at that time. And I made a year's income basically in about 3.5 months, but I did a year's work in about 3.5 months also. And so when I came home from that back to Iowa, the fur markets had just fell apart. The values of furs had gone way down, and I realized that my days as a professional trapper were over. I could not make a living at it anymore. But I had enough money to get me through the next year. And so I had a friend who owned a crop mate fertilizer company in Thompson, Iowa. He was a big bow hunter. We got along great, and he hired me to work for him, and I filled anhydrous tanks and different things like that. And the busiest time of the year, of course, was right during bow hunting season and trapping season. So I had a really hard time with that. Well, but he was a bow hunter too, and so he got it, and we would bow hunt before we went to work in the morning. And, he'd be on the radio during the day. He'd be like, I just saw a great big buck run into Paul Johnson's slough. Get your bow and get down here. And so I'd literally hunt with him on company time from time to time. So it wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't what I wanted to do for a living. There was tests that I had to take and certifications that I had to get if I was going to really move up and do more of this. And I really just didn't want to do that. I knew I wanted to be in the outdoors, fishing, hunting, trapping in some way, and have a career there. So I began to slip into a depression. And that depression just got deeper and deeper, and I was in a really, really bad place. This Alaska thing was done for, at least for now, because of the Exxon Valdez oil spill in the spring of 1989. The trapping was done, and I'm stuck in this job I really don't like. And I don't see a way to get back into the business of the outdoors. And this depression just got deeper and deeper and deeper until I started to have suicidal ideations. It's hard for me to even let my mind go back to this point in my life where I almost abandoned my wife and kids. Wow, that's kind of snuck up on me. I didn't realize it was going to hit me like that. But this was a real turning point in my life. I could do an entire video on what happened over a few months in the fall of 1989. But I don't want to go too far down that rabbit trail. But I'll tell you this. This is the point where I drove a stake in the ground. And my life made a radical change. And like I said, I don't want to go too far down this trail. I could do an entire video on this, but I'm alive today because I fully surrendered my life to God. And I said, I can't do this. I've completely screwed it up. I need to just give up and let you take over. And for the first time in my life, he began to speak to me. And he really said, I've given you these passions, and the things that you're passionate about, you've taken them to a whole new level. If you throw yourself into something, you become really good at it. And I've given you the gift of storytelling. I've given you the gift of explaining this stuff, and you can help other people be successful. And once again, much to the shock of my family and friends, I went to college. I went to college at 30 years of age. I did a 2-year degree program and got an associate's degree in journalism photography. And I began to write magazine articles. And I sold magazine articles left and right, and I had no idea how good I was. It was a complete shock to me that I was a really gifted writer. And that led me to a lifetime of experience in the outdoors and going places that I never thought I would be able to go, and doing hunting and fishing and trapping things that unreal what I've been able to experience. And it was because at that moment, you've probably heard the song called Jesus Take the Wheel. Well, I'm telling you, if you have to tell Jesus to take the wheel, you're in the wrong seat. That's all I'm going to say about that. So through the 1990s, I wrote magazine articles and I wrote books, and all of the things that I had learned about, especially about trapping. The first several books I wrote were trapping books. I wrote a deer hunting book in '93 with Tom Miranda. I did a couple trapping videos with Tom Miranda. That's how I got introduced, I guess, to the business of videos, but really didn't pay any attention to it at that time. Had no interest in being on ESPN with him or on TV or anything like that. I just knew I was a good writer and I wanted to write, and I was making a good living at it, and I was writing hunting and fishing and trapping books all through the 90s. I wrote hundreds and hundreds of magazine articles, and to this day now I've written 17 books and around 1,000 magazine articles. I also started running fishing tournaments in the 90s, and that grew and grew and grew. And I was a busy guy. Well, another bear encounter happened in the early 1990s that probably is the one that really influenced me to be passionate about learning more about bears and about becoming a bear hunter. And I was going on a fishing trip with a bunch of buddies up into Canada, and we were camping out in the wilderness. And this area where we were camping people had camped there before, and someone had acclimated a couple of bears to this camp spot, and they'd been feeding them or left food out or something, and we just landed right in the middle of it. I mean, when we got there and started setting up our camp and stuff, there was immediately bears starting to circle the camp. And long story short, for the next 4 or 5 days, they just absolutely terrorized us. I mean, they would try to, I literally was cooking, and there's a package of bacon on the table beside me, and a bear came up and tried to grab that package of bacon. I hit him over the head with a skillet. A bear bit a hole through my tent right above my head in the night, and I'm telling you, it's hard to go back to sleep after something like that happens to you. But there was these 2 bears, and they were in and around camp the whole time. And I got my 10-year-old son Ben with me, and he's sitting in a lawn chair, and a bear just walks right by him, and the whole thing was horrible, but it made me just fascinated with bears. And I think at that time, because I'd been doing a lot of bow hunting deer, and I had started traveling to hunt deer to other states and so forth, but I just like, man, bow hunting bears seems so fascinating to me. I really want to do that someday. Well, through the 90s, you know, I was doing all this writing and publishing and books and stuff like that, and then and the fishing tournaments, and then in the late 90s, it was either 99, I think it might have been 2000, and Jeff Folsom from Minnesota started a magazine called Bear Hunting Magazine. And I saw a copy of that magazine. I thought that'd be cool to write for this magazine, but I don't know nothing about hunting bears. But I called up Jeff, and I'm like, you know, you got this new magazine. You really probably can't afford to pay professional writers like me, but what if I was able to get a free bear hunting trip, and I'll give you the article for nothing if I can just get to experience a bear hunt. And I'll do an article on what it's like for a whitetail bow hunter to go shoot a bear for the first time. And he loved the idea. So I called around a little bit in northern Minnesota, ended up with Chris Ford up by Lake of the Woods. And Chris agreed to give me a hunt at no charge in exchange for the publicity of having an article about it in Bear Hunting Magazine. So I went on this bear hunt, and I shot a bear and got hopelessly addicted to bear hunting. I'm like, this is awesome. This is so cool. Being that close to bears and having a chance to shoot one with a bow, and it was just, the article was super successful. Jeff loved it in the magazine, and Chris got some calls and booked some hunts out of it. And I just said, I got to do more of this. So the next year, I ended up taking my daughter and son to northern Minnesota to hunt with Tim Earlbeck. And I didn't hunt, but my daughter got a bear and my son got a bear. And I did a story for Bear Hunting Magazine called Boys and Girls and Bears, and another really popular article. My life took another crazy turn on November 8th of 2000. And I was about 3 miles from home, and I had my spotting scope mounted to the window of my truck, and I'm looking at this nice 10-point buck. It's bow season, it's the rut, and he's out on this property where I have permission to hunt. And I'm trying to analyze a spot where, a path, I'm looking for a path where I could get out there and get close enough to shoot him with a bow. And I'm just sitting there looking at this buck, and all of a sudden I heard this gigantic explosion. And I turned and looked, and in the direction of my house, there's this huge black mushroom cloud. And I just looked at that and I'm like, man, that's got to be what the heck? That's got to be really close to my house. So I took off, and sure enough, I got close to home. My daughter and son had already called the fire department, and at that time I had bought a mobile home that I had moved into the backyard, and I'd converted it into an office. And it had a propane gas leak. And well, my son Cody had come home from school, and he had gone down to the office, and he was going to play games on a computer or something. And he said it smelled like gas really bad in there. So he shut the door and went back to the house, and when he was halfway walking back to the house is when it exploded. Wow. Cody's an airline pilot today. Kind of crazy to think about how close that was. Well, I lost everything. We did not save a scrap of paper. 14,000 photographs that I had taken and cataloged and filed were gone. So I got an insurance settlement, and I just started thinking about, what am I going to do now? I lost everything on all my computers and books and videos and everything, all those photos, it's all gone. And I'm telling you, if you've never had a fire, it's hard to describe the feeling of loss. Deer mounts and shed antlers, they're all gone. Well, I knew I needed to start over with something, and my wife and I and our kids, we had been vacationing in the summer in the Brainerd area of Minnesota for many years. I mean, like, I was a really big in-fisherman fan. I watched all their TV shows, and I loved going to the Brainerd area because of Al Linder and Ron Linder. Little did I know that one day those guys would be my friends, and I would spend quite a bit of time working with Al. Another rabbit trail I'm not going to go on. And I just told my wife, I said, I think we need a fresh start. Let's just sell this place. Let's just pack up and move to Minnesota. Being a writer and being in the fishing business, and I could kind of live wherever I wanted anyway. And I thought Brainerd's a great place to go. Well, she was not on board at first, but people say you must have a really supportive wife. And I say, well, I've got a tolerant wife. And for me, that's probably what I need. And she's fantastic. And we packed up. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm starting to get hooked on bear hunting. So when I'm looking at places up around the Brainerd area, north of Brainerd, I'm looking at the Foothill State Forest. I'm looking at the Pillsbury State Forest. I'm thinking, yeah, I could bear hunt here. We packed up in July 2001. We moved north of Brainerd. And that's where I really went whole hog into the bear hunting for the first time. So I was a do-it-yourself bear hunter. And at that time, you could draw a tag about every year to every other year. And you could put out as many baits as you want. So I'd put out like 10 baits. And when I look back, some of them were in dumb places, okay? I didn't know what I was doing. Then I'd have 2 or 3 that were really good. And so the next year, I'd take those 2 or 3 and I'd put out a bunch more. And over time I started to analyze, okay, this one's really good, this one's really good, this one's really good. You know, why am I getting bears here in the daylight when these others I don't get any bears at all, or I can only get bears at night? And I started trying to look for features of each of these things. And remember what I told you about how I analyze things, and when I'm passionate about something, I just pour myself into it. Well, I started recognizing what makes a good location, and I started realizing there's some things that are really different about a good location. You know, the trouble I was having with getting bears to come in during the daylight had a lot to do with where the baits were located. And people, if you don't understand bear hunting and baiting bears, you wouldn't really realize why that location is so important. But I also found that, you know, I started using trail cameras fairly early on. They were the film cameras where you had to put a roll of 36 pictures in there and then go get them developed. When I found really good locations where the bears felt comfortable, then they started chewing on my cameras because they're just in there a lot. And, you know, if the bears don't feel very comfortable in there, they might come in only at night, or if they do come in during the daylight, they're liable to come in and just take a few bites and then leave because they just don't have a sense of security there. But once you find spots where the bears will just come in and hang out, next thing you know, they're like looking around, they're climbing in your tree stand, they're chewing on your trail camera. They have a sense of security there. So I started really analyzing and learning more about this, and I wasn't very successful right away, but I'd get a bear or two. I think I got a bear in the third year that I was doing it by myself, and then I started becoming more and more successful. And to really give you an example of how crazy I was at that time, like I'm in church and a guy says, yeah, I had a bear run across the road in front of me on the way in this morning. I asked him, well, where was it? And he told me where the bear ran across the road in front of him. And I literally went out there after church and I went to that spot and I went, okay, where was that bear coming from? Why was he here right now at this time of the day? Where was he coming from? Where was he going to? And why did he cross the road right here? I'm like, that's nuts, people. You got to be crazy to do that. But that's where I was at. I was learning so much about bears and trying to analyze them. Well, pretty soon I was writing for Bear Hunting Magazine regularly, and I actually became the editor of Bear Hunting Magazine, and that's when I started getting calls from outfitters across Canada and stuff, and they'd say, hey, come and hunt with me, write a story about it, you can hunt for free. So I'd try to do one or two of those a year. And I would combine what I learned from each of the outfitters, and they're all a little different, but there's always, bears are bears pretty much no matter where you go. Bear behavior is a lot different in the wilds of Canada than it is in Minnesota or Wisconsin, where there's a lot of hunting pressure, I'll tell you that. But bear biology and bear behavior is similar. So I was learning more and more and more, and then in 2013 I wrote the book, The Bear Baiter's Manual. And I had killed quite a few bears at that time, and I felt like I really knew what I was doing. And reading that book now, I look back and I go, yeah, I mean, I was certainly more knowledgeable than your average bear hunter by a long ways, but I've come a long way since then too. Well, about that time, the magazine business was really starting to tank. And I was selling less magazine articles because the magazines weren't buying as many articles, and they were cutting back on their issues. A lot of monthly magazines dropped back to 6 times a year. So I started a YouTube channel, and it was called The Bow Hunting Road, because mainly what I was putting on it was my bow hunting whitetail trips, and I was adding a little bit of bear hunting content in. But the bear hunting content was what really got the traction, and the bear hunting videos would do really well. So I just started doing more and more of them. And it became I believe, the #1 bear hunting channel on YouTube, with about almost 39,000 subscribers right now and 19 million views. Also about that time, 2012, 2013, I started getting asked to do seminars at sport shows. So I was doing sport show seminars on bear hunting in different states, different sport shows, doing quite a few of them actually. I think I did 6 of them, 6 shows 1 year. And I don't remember the year, and I don't even remember the exact show, but I'm pretty sure it was in Michigan, where I had just given a seminar, and I opened it up to questions after the seminar that I was talking about. It's like Bear Hunting 101. And a guy in the back raised his hand and he says, "Oh, I got a question for the bear professor." And I kind of laughed, and everybody kind of laughed. And he asked a good question, and I answered it the best I could. And I never thought much more about it until the YouTube channel really started to grow in the late, 2018, 2019. It really started to take off. And then during COVID, it grew even more. So between YouTube and Bear Hunting Magazine, and I did a bear hunting video called How to Bait Big Bears. It was a DVD that's sold out now. The book is sold out also, and I probably won't redo either one of them. I'm pretty much all in on YouTube right now, but I'm also writing a column for Bear Hunting Magazine in each issue. Somewhere along in there in the early 2000s, that memory came back to me of that guy calling me the bear professor, and I started doing these videos called The Bear Professor Answers Your Questions. And I thought, this Bear Professor thing, I'm just going to take that and run with it. And so I think I've done 19 of these videos now called The Bear Professor Answers Your Questions. And I just answer questions about bear hunting. And a lot of them have already been answered on my other YouTube videos. I think there's close to 800 YouTube videos on this channel now, and probably 3/4 of them are bear hunting related. So in 2000, with the change in the magazine business, almost completely out of the fishing tournament business, just running one fundraising fishing tournament with Al Linder for Teen Challenge. I did that for 11 years and just retired last year. But the magazine business was tanking, and they just weren't buying very many articles. I just thought, you know what, I need another source of income. I've always loved taking people hunting, and man, I've got dozens of family and friends that I have helped get bears both in Minnesota and in Canada, and I think I'm going to start guiding. And I bought a piece of property. I didn't really think about guiding out of this piece of property up on a lake place in northeastern Minnesota, northeast of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and I really wasn't planning to guide out of there. But then after I just started putting baits out up there because that's what I do. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting a lot of bear on the baits. And it's not because that area is anything special. It's no better than any other good bear hunting area in Minnesota. It's just that I had a system that was really working. And I just thought, why am I helping all these other people get bears for free when I could be guiding and getting paid for it? And I got the lake place here now where I could, put people up, and I just opened Bernie's Bear Camp, and it has exploded. And I'm completely booked up for the next 3 years, and I've got deposits in for 5 years from now. So it's going super well, and everybody's getting bears, and we're having a blast with it. I got some great guides, and I've met so many cool people through it. Okay, so in 2025, then I started the International Black Bear Show, which is a sports show, basically, and a rendezvous, a weekend get-together for bear hunters, and it's in Grand Rapids, Minnesota this year, 2026, and it's growing really good. It's really doing well. There's a lot of seminars, and it's fun to meet people from all over that love to bear hunt. I got vendors coming from all over the U.S. and Canada, and that's been really fun. And I lost a little money on it the first year, but it looks like it's got potential to generate a little income. I don't think I'll ever get rich off it by any means, but hey, it's bear hunting related, and I'm in the hunting and fishing business. I get up every morning and hustle, but I'm not working a job where I'm punching a time clock, putting money in someone else's wallet. So if you watched this whole video, thank you for staying with it until the end. And that is how I got this way. That's how I became the Bear Professor. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.